South Korea is one of the safest countries in the world when it comes to guns. Civilian ownership of firearms is strictly prohibited, and even hunting rifles must be stored at police stations. Gun violence to people living in modern-day Korea is virtually unheard of. And yet, in 1982, the same country was host to a gun massacre that was so horrific, the perpetrator earned a place in the Guinness World Records for being the most prolific murderer in a single day. 56 people were killed, 34 more wounded, all at the hands of a single person in just 8 hours. The tragedy was, at the time, unlike anything the world had ever seen. And it happened in a single rural township in South Korea. And the man responsible, Woo Bum-kon, a man that none of the residents would have ever expected. What on earth happened in that small township that night? This is the story of the worst mass shooting in South Korean history, the Woo Bum-kon massacre. If you and your child spent years growing up on social media and experienced serious mental health struggles, you should hear this. Recently, a jury ordered Meta and YouTube to pay millions for their role in designing and promoting addictive platforms. They knew their apps could contribute to anxiety, depression, and body image issues, but didn't share those risks while prioritizing profits. The recent historic verdict underscores the consequences of those decisions. Now, Morgan & Morgan is stepping up to hold these platforms accountable for the harm they caused. Click the link in my bio to take a short quiz, and you may be entitled to a potential recovery of over $1,000. The evening of April 26, 1982, Guknumyeon Township, Uryong County, South Gyeongsang Province. A township in South Korea is an administrative district. It's basically a collection of small villages in the countryside. And in the villages of Guknumyeon Township, this spring evening was no different from any other. Farmers had come in from the fields and were sitting down to have dinner with their families. Some people had gathered at a neighbor's house for a funeral wake. Elsewhere, a neighborhood association meeting was underway. No one had any idea what was about to happen. It was around 9:30 in the evening. At one house in Togongli village, a group of young men in their late teens and early 20s were hanging out together. Until one of them came back from the bathroom with a startled look on his face. He said he'd heard gunshots somewhere outside. At first, nobody believed him. What reason would there ever be for gunshots in a village like this? There was no military base nearby. It wasn't hunting season, but when they actually stopped and listened, sure enough, somewhere in the distance, they could hear the dull, heavy crack of gunfire. The young men bolted outside to see what was happening. A moment later, a man appeared before them. He was walking toward them in what looked like military fatigues, his footsteps steady and deliberate. The young men could tell that something had gone terribly wrong. They dove into the bushes and hid. At first, they thought it must be a North Korean spy. It was the only explanation that made sense. They stayed hidden, trying to breathe as quietly as they could for 30 or 40 minutes. When the village finally went quiet, one of the young men made a run for his house. But on the way there, a neighbor stopped him. Her face was white as a sheet, and what she said next made his stomach drop. "There's someone lying in front of your gate." He sprinted home the moment he heard those words. What he found in the yard shook him to his core. His mother had been shot and was lying on the ground. And next to her, her 20-year-old sister, both dead. He nearly collapsed. His father, thankfully, hadn't been home. His younger sibling had been asleep in another room and had survived. But losing his mother and sister at once, the shock was almost unbearable. He pulled himself together and tried to call for help. The phone line was completely dead. He jumped on his motorcycle and rode straight to the post office. It was the closest location to his house that was staffed with government employees. That was his only thought, get to the post office and report this. But when he arrived, he realized he wasn't going to get the help he had hoped for. Every single employee at the post office had been shot. The shooter, Woo Bum-kon, 27, had been working his way through the village. The shooting had begun earlier that evening, right in front of the Gungnyumeon Township Police substation. A young man in his 20s, heading home after finishing his military reserve training, was the first victim. Bum-kon had walked up to him and opened fire without a word. The young man tried to shield himself with his hands, but he died on the spot. The post office was Bum-kon's next stop. He walked inside and shot 2 telephone operators. Then a mail carrier who was on overnight duty. All 3 died where they fell. From there, he moved on to the neighboring village of Apgongni, where residents had gathered for their monthly neighborhood association meeting. A perfectly ordinary get-together set up for locals to discuss community matters. He walked in and opened fire on everyone. There was no time to run, no way to escape. These people, who had simply come together for a routine meeting, were cut down where they sat. And here's what made it even more terrifying. This wasn't wild, random shooting. Every single bullet he fired was a precision shot, aimed deliberately at a specific target. Perfectly placed. This was not the work of an ordinary person. Who was this man? After the slaughter at the Apgongni village meeting, Bum-kon moved on. His next destination was Eungeri, a slightly larger village with a small market where people regularly came and went. The market was busy, as usual, and nobody there had any inkling of what was coming. The man appeared in the middle of the market square, and he started shooting again. People fell without understanding what was happening. Anyone who tried to run found the barrel of his gun tracking their back as they fled. What made it worse was this. The entire time the man was working his way through the villages, not a single person was there to stop him. No one was protecting the township. No police officers were responding to calls. There was just one man with a gun, going on a rampage, completely unchallenged. From Eungeri village, he moved to his next target, a small village store along the road. Inside were the owner and his family, an ordinary family running a little shop. Bum-kon walked in and shot them without hesitation. 2 were killed, 3 more were wounded. He headed out. This time, he went to a funeral wake. A family in the village was mourning the loss of a loved one. And the house was full of neighbors who had come to pay their respects. People were sitting with their grief. They had no idea a far greater grief was about to find them. When Bum-kon walked in, he did something completely unexpected. He stopped to pay his respects to the deceased. He offered condolence money. And then one of the villagers recognized him. That neighbor asked him what he was doing walking around with an unloaded gun. A strange smile spread across Bum-kon's face. "Let me show you there are bullets in it." He pulled the trigger before he'd even finished the sentence. The room erupted into chaos. The people who had gathered to mourn were now being shot one by one. 12 people were hit at the wake alone. But even then, it wasn't over. Bum-kon walked on to another village called Pyeongchonni. He went through the streets, forcing his way into private homes, one after another. People asleep in their beds, families sitting down to eat, an elderly man watching TV. He spared no one. How could any human being do something like this? No one who witnessed the aftermath could even begin to understand. And yet, this real-life horror was unfolding in this tiny rural corner of the country. One man moving through 4 villages, leaving a trail of death behind him. What had started in front of the Kungnyeon police substation spread to the post office, the neighborhood meeting in Apgungni, the market, and the store in Ungeri, a funeral wake, and then the homes of Pyeongchunni. People across the township were being mowed down without mercy. People wanted to know, who was he? A North Korean spy? A deranged outsider who had wandered into the village? People grasped for any explanation. But the identity of the man walking through those villages with a rifle was neither of those things. He was the active duty police officer assigned to that exact township. Woo Bum-kon, a patrolman assigned to the Kungnyeon substation. The officer who was supposed to be protecting these people. A man many of the villagers knew by name. Someone they had shared drinks with, exchanged greetings with on the street. That man had just begun massacring them. But even knowing who he was didn't explain why he was doing what he was doing. Patrolman Woo Bum-kon was far from an ordinary rural cop. Before joining the police, Bum-kon had served in the Marine Corps. And not as an average Marine. Within his unit, he was regarded as one of the best sharpshooters around, earning him the designation as expert marksman. He also held 2 black belts in martial arts. In terms of physical capability alone, he was exactly the kind of asset the military wanted to develop. Then, in 1980, Bum-kon left the service to become a police officer, like his father. This was the early 1980s, a turbulent period in South Korea's history. The government at the time actively recruited military veterans through various channels. If you had martial arts credentials, a sharpshooting qualification, or even just solid driving skills, you could get hired as a cop. A Marine Corps expert marksman with 2 black belts in martial arts, Bum-kon was exactly the kind of person this recruitment track was designed for. Less than a year after joining the force, he was elected for a special assignment, the Presidential Security Service, Unit 101 at the Blue House. Unit 101 was the specialized police unit responsible for guarding the interior of the Blue House itself. Even the name carried a certain pride. 101 meaning 1% beyond perfection, the idea that they pursued something more than flawless. A unit that didn't just meet the standard, it set one of its own. The president at the time was Chun Doo-hwan, the man who had seized power through a military coup and ruled with an iron fist, and Bum-kon had been selected to guard him up close. And someone fresh to the police force, that was an extraordinary honor. He was protecting the most powerful man in South Korea. It's not hard to imagine how much that sense of status meant to Bum-kon, but that pride was about to come crashing down. The exact circumstances have never been fully disclosed, but Bum-kon was said to have severe drinking habits and violent temper. And at some point, he was reassigned, demoted from the Blue House to the Uryong police station. It's hard to overemphasize how much of a fall from grace it was to descend from the Blue House to a provincial precinct, and yet it didn't stop there. At Uryong, he got into trouble again, and from Uryong, he was demoted further, sent all the way out to the Kungnyeon Township substation, one of the most remote postings in the area. From guarding the president to manning a one-room outpost in the middle of nowhere. For Bum-kon, that must have felt like a humiliation he simply couldn't swallow. From the time he arrived in Kungnyeon, he rapidly gained a reputation. He was the man drunk on soju, ranting about his lot in life. There was a small liquor distributor in the village at the time, and Bum-kon was a regular. He would sit with a shop owner over drinks, and he had a phrase he came back to again and again. "I don't belong here." How could he have gone from guarding the president to ending up in a backwater location like this? Bum-kon just couldn't make peace with it. And gradually, what came out of his mouth started getting darker. "I will kill them all." He said it from time to time while drinking with other locals. everyone brushed it off as mere drunken talk. Nobody thought for a second it could become real. Then came April 26, 1982. That fateful day, Bum-kon had eaten lunch at the home he shared with his girlfriend and fallen asleep. While he was napping, a fly landed on him. His girlfriend swatted it away with an open hand, lightly tapping his chest to shoo the fly away. That trivial moment set him off. Bum-kon woke up furious, demanding to know why she was hitting him while he slept. A petty argument broke out and Bum-kon left the house in a rage. He came back in a short while later, heavily drunk. This time, he beat her, badly enough to make her nose bleed. After that violent outburst, he left again. He walked to the Gungnyumeon substation. The substation was empty. All the other officers had gone on a group trip to some hot springs in a different province. Bum-kon had the substation entirely to himself. He walked straight to the armory, and from it, he took 2 M2 carbine rifles, 180 rounds of ammunition, and 7 grenades. The night's tragedy began there. Shortly after, the first shot rang out over the village. Word of what was happening didn't reach the outside world until 20 to 30 minutes after that first gunshot. It wasn't until around 10 o'clock that night that a report finally came in. The Uryong police station received the call. Under normal circumstances, they would have reached the township within an hour, but they couldn't deploy their officers immediately. To respond, they needed weapons, and the officer holding the armory key had stepped out to get a drink. It took 40 minutes just to track him down and get the armory open. By the time officers from Uryong finally arrived in the township, it was past 12:10 a.m., more than 2 hours after the first report came in. And yet, they did not advance, but rather decided to lay in wait. Bum-kon had already moved through 4 villages by then. After killing people in Pyeongchon-ni, he was on the move again. Along the way, he came across a young man. His name was Seo. Seo looked at Bum-kon and asked, bewildered, "What's going on? I keep hearing gunshots." The whole village had been on edge from the sound of it. Seo was no different. But Bum-kon's answer was chilling. "It's a spy. There's an emergency. Let's get to your house. I will keep you safe." The man pulling the trigger on everyone in sight was standing right in front of him and saying it was a spy with a straight face. And Seo believed him. Why wouldn't he? Bum-kon was a local police officer. Seo led Bum-kon back to his house. On the way, Bum-kon gathered several more villagers and brought them along to Seo's home, under the pretense of keeping everyone together for safety. In reality, he was taking them hostage. By the time they arrived at Seo's house, Bum-kon had gathered more than 10 villagers. It wasn't until 3:30 a.m. that Uryong officers finally advanced to the village. But by then, Bum-kon had already stopped shooting people. He had stopped sometime around 1:30 in the morning. The killing was over long before the police got there. 5 o'clock in the morning, officers finally confirmed that Bum-kon was inside Seo's house with the hostages. At around 5:35 a.m., a police loudspeaker crackled outside the house. "Woo Bum-kon, you are surrounded." Inside the house, those words came through. One of the people inside moved toward the door, reaching for the handle out of sheer relief, thinking it was finally over. Safety was just on the other side. They were wrong. Bum-kon pulled out one of the grenades he had taken from the armory and detonated it, killing 3 of the villagers inside, and himself. And with that, the night's horror finally came to an end. Over the course of just 8 hours, a rampage of one man, consumed by rage, left 56 dead and 34 wounded. The number of those killed would later be widely reported to be 62. Presumably, this number includes injured victims who later succumbed to their injuries. However, the official count, according to the South Korean police, remains at 56. Since then, there have been single-shooter massacres in other countries with higher death tolls, but at the time, it was a tragedy unlike anything that had been heard of. But what came after was perhaps just as disturbing. Despite the magnitude of what had happened, the government's response was shockingly inadequate. Dozens of innocent people had been killed. Their families would carry wounds that could never fully heal. And yet, while the police had moved at a glacial pace to stop the shooting, the government moved with remarkable speed to make the story disappear. The government was anxious about public opinion. Chun Doo-hwan's government had crushed the democratization movement in Gwangju by force in 1980, with an official death toll of almost 200. Into that climate came a one-man massacre. A police officer with ties to the Blue House Presidential Security Unit had slaughtered innocent citizens. For the government, it was a disaster. The interior minister resigned. Media coverage was suppressed and gone within a week. Compensation and funeral expenses were paid out in 2 days, with no deliberation. Not a single word of apology came from the president. Just like that, news of 56 deaths was buried by the state. It wouldn't be until 2024, more than 40 years later, that the victims of the massacre would be formally acknowledged with a memorial statue installed in Uryong. As for the survivors, they are still living with the aftermath. One victim takes painkillers every day to manage the constant pain from old gunshot wounds. Another lost their voice when a bullet passed through their throat. Someone else can no longer walk. There is reportedly a family where a 94-year-old mother still cares for her 64-year-old son who was injured that night. For the victims, the tragedy of that night has never ended. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.